Hello, and welcome to Season 7 of Buffy and the Art of Story. If you love Buffy the Vampire Slayer and you love creating stories or just taking them apart to see how they work, you're in the right place. Today, we're looking at the last 5 episodes ever of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, from Dirty Girls to Chosen, to see whether they form one complete final story arc for Buffy. I am Lisa M. Lilly, author of supernatural thrillers, traditional detective mysteries, and the Writing as a Second Career books for writers. As I look at those last 5 episodes, I'll talk about whether or not we see the major plot points and turns I've been discussing through all the episodes as a complete story arc. When I went into this, I did not know if that would be the case. Obviously, there are no spoilers left for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't get into the comic book seasons, but I will have a foreshadowing section at the end to talk about Angel the series, a little bit about the first episode and a little bit about the series as a whole, so that part does include some big picture spoilers. Okay, let's dive into the Hellmouth. Dirty Girls aired on April 15, 2003, Empty Places on April 29, Touched on May 6, End of Days on May 13th, and Chosen on May 20, 2023. The opening conflict for this 5-episode arc is the same as the opening conflict in Dirty Girls. A potential, whose name we learn is Shannon, runs through the woods chased by bringers, and she flags down that car. Caleb, dressed as a preacher, is in it, and at first seems like he is rescuing her, but things quickly take a turn. He calls her a whore. He uses his cigarette lighter and his ring to burn a mark in her neck. And he stabs her in the stomach and gives her a message for the one and only accept no substitutes Slayer, then shoves her out of the car. Behind her, Willow and Faith are driving. This is Faith's reappearance in Sunnydale, first one in since season 4. The car stops. Willow runs out and goes to Shannon. Faith gets out of the car and says, "Yep, guess I'm back in Sunnydale." This is a great opening for this 5-episode arc. It sets up the conflict between the Slayers, the Potentials, and Caleb. This is also our first introduction of Caleb. Faith and Caleb together appearing in Sunnydale is why I see this as its own arc. This is new. It emphasizes the theme both of the season and particularly of this 5-episode arc, the one and only Slayer. The idea of Buffy alone being the one that is going to be emphasized throughout. We have Shannon getting seriously injured. Now, we have seen Potentials be injured before and die, but Caleb just came on the scene, and first thing he does is stab this Potential and throw her out of a moving vehicle. And he sends a message to Buffy. So we are setting up this direct Buffy to Caleb conflict. Next, as you know from listening, I look for the story spark or inciting incident for any story, and that's what gets the main plot rolling. It should come by 10% through a story. It could be much earlier. Here, about 10% of the entire arc comes around when Buffy and Faith and Spike have that encounter in the graveyard, the mix-up with who is who and who's on what side, and some tension for sure between Buffy and Faith. And almost exactly at 10%, Buffy and Faith return to the Summers home. That is key to me because this is where so much of the conflict is going to center between Buffy and Faith and between Buffy and the Potentials and Buffy and Giles, who is one of the first people Faith encounters, and Spike explains to her the tension is not so much about her, it's about Giles trying to kill him. So we have that reminder of all these divisions among Buffy and her friends. Right after that, just slightly after 10% through, Caleb is shown in the vineyard. He's getting a glass of wine out of a wood barrel with a tap, and he talks about the story of the Last Supper, makes a joke about the body and blood of Christ turning to wine. And what if you had white wine? Would it be lymph? I do not think I mentioned this in the episode because I was short on time. But when that episode came out, Christianity Today did an article, or at least an editorial, about Buffy, saying how anti-Christian it was and anti-religion, referring specifically to this scene. I remember thinking, okay, clearly you have not watched this show if it took you till season 7 to figure out that it's irreverent about religion. The magazine commented on this when in the very first episode of Buffy, the pilot, Giles referred to the Adam and Eve story as a creation myth. He basically said, contrary to your myth of creation, I don't think he said your, but whatever he said, popular culture's myth of creation, the world did not start as a paradise. So we set up immediately in Buffy that we are not in the world of traditional religion. Now, it's kind of interesting that crosses affect vampires. That doesn't really seem to fit with Buffy's worldview. And maybe at some point I'll explore all the Buffy and religion issues in a bonus episode. I see that part as it's so ingrained in vampire lore that they kept the crosses and they kept the holy water. But the jury's out in Buffy, as Buffy says, as to whether God exists. So I've gone far afield from our story spark here. I think it is both Buffy and Faith reconnecting, I guess you could say, and Caleb here, because now he talks to the first, who appears to him as Buffy. And in that conversation, we learn that he's the one who blew up the council, that he's been working for the first, and that the message he sent to Buffy was to make her come to him at the vineyard. He believes she will, because curiosity is woman's first sin. And this really does set off the Buffy-Caleb conflict for these 5 episodes. Up until the beginning of Chosen, Caleb will be the main manifestation or agent of the first that Buffy has to deal with. And he is so powerful and dangerous and violent that the others lose confidence in Buffy. That's not the only reason, but that's a big part of it. The first major plot turn in this 5-episode arc comes right around a quarter way through it. And this is where I look for that turn that comes from outside the protagonist, spins the story in a new direction, and raises the stakes. Here that happens during the second episode, Empty Places. Buffy comes home to the Summers house. After seeing Xander in the hospital, she has that research that Willow got from the police, and she tells a couple of the potentials and Faith that they should go through it, and they need to know everything there is to know about Caleb, who he is, what he wants. And Kennedy says his ability to render a Slayer useless in just punch. Buffy is distraught. She heads to the school for some time to herself, but she encounters Caleb again. And he ultimately flings her through the interior window. She slams against some lockers and is knocked out. But during their back and forth, where he's taunting her, she's taunting him, she becomes convinced that Caleb really does have something at the vineyard that he is trying to keep her from, because he keeps trying to, in her view, misdirect her to the seal and to school. This is about 25% through the story. It does come from outside Buffy because it is Caleb attacking her and unintentionally revealing a lot by what he says, which then causes Buffy to make this decision that causes a huge turn, because the potentials, Giles, Faith, everyone, they do not think going back in the vineyard is a good idea. Now, is this a major enough turn? Probably the bigger turn is going to the vineyard, Xander getting his eye poked out, potentials getting killed, Buffy getting knocked out immediately. So in that sense, I'm not sure the 5 episodes was meant to be one full story. It probably was not. And I think it works really well the way it is. We definitely want that confrontation at the vineyard, that first one, to come earlier. So we have that. That's a much bigger turn. Certainly raises the stakes in the sense of now we know how powerful Caleb is. I do think this moment, though, where Buffy encounters Caleb and has this revelation, figures this thing out, raises the stakes more. Because the initial battle with Caleb told us, the audience, and Buffy and everyone, how powerful Caleb was. But that was not new. That was not a change. It was just something they did not know yet. And everyone was deeply distressed, but it didn't immediately change what they were doing. This moment where Buffy figures this out is what really turns the story toward Buffy wanting to go back in. Next major plot turn, you could probably all say it with me at this point, is the midpoint, where I look for the protagonist to make a major commitment, go all in on the quest, or suffer a major reversal, or both. Around the middle of this story would be about halfway through Touched. Buffy does have a major reversal half an episode before that, at the end of Empty Places. That is where she is thrown out of the house. Hard to argue that there's any more major reversal for Buffy than that. There is another reversal, though, at this midpoint, because it is when Spike finds Buffy in the house. Now, Spike finding her isn't a reversal, but that's when we see how disheartened Buffy really is. At the house, she still seems sure that she was right. She faltered as they all pushed back against her. She couldn't quite believe what was happening, but she was sure. Now she is despondent. She has doubt. She says to Spike, "What does it matter if I quit or they took it from me?" Because he tries to make a distinction. And why should I try to take it back? I say the word and some girl dies. So Buffy has really internalized this. And it's a great example of building on a reversal. I do think the major reversal was her being thrown out. And then we escalate it. We build on it because it is Buffy's confidence. It is who Buffy is that she is now questioning. We have seen Buffy go through questions about her abilities, her power, who she is before. The beginning of season 4, when she went to college and felt so out of her element and it affected her fighting, which then spiraled into her feeling like maybe she really couldn't go up against Sunday, the vampire who initially bested her, who didn't seem particularly powerful. But this is far, far beyond that. She is questioning everything. And we get Spike making that speech about all that he admires about her, that she's a hell of a woman, that she's the one. So at the midpoint, we have that echo of the one in a positive way, but doubling down on that theme that we started with, the one and only Slayer, the idea of Buffy being alone, everything weighing on her. And what does that mean? Because one of the things Anya says is, why is it automatically you? Why are you the leader? And Buffy has not really grappled with that. She's always, in the time period of the show, always been the Slayer. Even though there was Kendra, there was Faith, Buffy started slaying before either of them had more experience. This was the first time that she really questioned that role because she was in a new place in this season of having to be a leader of these potentials, looking to her for help and guidance. These reversals, the throwing out, Buffy's despondence, then shift to a commitment fueled in large part by Spike reflecting back to her who she is, what he admires about her, and sometime during the night, Buffy makes a decision and makes a commitment. And this is what I think is the really strong midpoint of this 5-episode arc. We don't see it, it's in her head, but she decides to go back to the vineyard alone and to confront Caleb. So again, we have that alone idea. It makes total sense here, though, because Buffy does not want to risk anyone else, but she is sure about Caleb and that he does have something and that she needs to go after it. When I think back on the episode, though, Untouched, it doesn't feel super powerful because we don't find out about it until we see Buffy go in there and fight Caleb. And I love that moment at the end of the episode when she sees that scythe, that vindication. She was right. That this midpoint commitment isn't more active in the moment, though, is part of why this 5-episode arc, to me, feels a little flat. I always want to be so engaged with these 5 episodes, and there are moments that I absolutely love. The one I just mentioned, the one where Buffy in the next episode gets the scythe out, where she uses it to save the potentials. I love all those moments, but coming up to the last episodes of Buffy, I'm rarely super excited about it. And when I think about Touched, if I hadn't just broken it down for the podcast, I wouldn't remember it at all because it feels just like a transition episode between Empty Places, where Buffy is thrown out at the end, and the next episode where she comes in and saves the potentials. It's what gets us from A to B. Now, the last major plot turn is the 3/4 turn, sometimes 2/3 of the way through the story. It should grow from the midpoint and take the story in another new direction and further raise the stakes. And here, it definitely does that. A reminder that the audiobook edition of my short story collection, The Tower, formerly known as Sears, and 2 other tales of urban horror, is now available for sale. These are not gory horror stories. They're more like Twilight Zone-like tales. And the title story, The Tower, formerly known as Sears, was made into a short film, Willis Tower, by James Ackerman. You can get the print, ebook, or audiobook editions. You'll find the links at lisalilly.com/the-tower. Buffy's commitment, her reversal, then her commitment to go confront Caleb on her own, leads to her finding that scythe. And the scythe gives her the information that she needs when she researches it, in addition to helping her fight. That leads her to what happens at the 3/4 turn. Right around then, Buffy stalks through the graveyard and kicks in the door to that temple, where she goes in and meets the Guardian. This is the old woman with the white hair. She tells Buffy that she and many others put the scythe in the rock. There's an implication that it might turn the tide for Buffy, but now we get the raising of the stakes. Caleb appears. He is newly strong, having merged with the first, and he kills the Guardian. Buffy now will have to battle him when he is the strongest that he has ever been in this 5-episode arc. And it is clearly going to be a fight to the death. Even Caleb says you can't slip out of this fight because partly she won last time, mostly by evading him. And all of this came from that message Caleb sent, that I have something of yours. Now Buffy has gotten that scythe, and she uses it to kill Caleb at the beginning of Chosen, our last episode. This, too, spins the story and raises the stakes because now, rather than having to focus on Caleb, which Buffy had to get the scythe, and then she had to defeat him, this very powerful agent of the first, now she will shift to confronting the first directly and what to do with that scythe, because the Guardian also implied it's a weapon, but Buffy already has weapons. So she implies there's more to it. So the entire narrative shifts. And Buffy is very active in that. And that is so important, particularly in that last third or quarter of the story. Your protagonist should be driving it, making decisions. And Buffy is doing that. She takes the scythe back. She takes it. She reconnects with her friends. I think she would have done that anyway, but she enlists their help. What is the deal with this scythe? What can it do? Where did it come from? How can we use this? Because this is all we have. And then once they do sort out what they can do with the scythe, she says, okay, we're going to open the seal. We're not going to wait for the first to decide when this final battle will be. We're going to trigger it. And so important, she gives the potentials a choice about what they want to do, which is something that they have not had the entire season. And I don't think I talked about this in Chosen. That title certainly fits the whole Buffy lore, and it fits the potentials. They've all been chosen, and none of them had a choice whether or not to be potential slayers. Buffy didn't have a choice about being the Slayer. At the very least, though, you could argue she had some measure of choice throughout the show because she was powerful, she was the Slayer, and there were times that she affirmatively embraced that. She quit in Prophecy Girl, and then she came back because she didn't want to live in this world. If it was the vampires world, she told Giles she would quit if Dawn died, and she sacrificed herself instead of letting that happen. In theory, at least, Buffy could walk away. She did at the end of season 2. Buffy's choices, such as they are, they're not great choices. It's a lot like what she told Ford in Lie to Me. You have a choice. It's not a good choice, but you have choices. The potentials really have not even had that, because we see when Annabelle goes off on her own, gets scared, she immediately gets killed. So their choice is leave and probably get killed, or stay and very likely get killed, but at least fight while it's happening or before it happens. But in Chosen, Buffy says you can make a choice. And their choice is a better one than Buffy has had, because becoming slayers, they won't become the one and only. They won't be alone. They will be part of a whole group of slayers, a whole community of slayers. We don't know how many there are, but it seems like thousands at least in the world. And she gives them that option. Now we get to the climax, where the opposing forces have their final confrontation and resolve the main plot. If we see the main plot of this 5-episode arc being that dealing with being alone and getting from Caleb whatever it is he has that belongs to Buffy. Well, let me back up, because those are two different things. So let's start with, if the main plot is getting whatever Caleb has, that's already resolved because Buffy got it and she used it to kill Caleb. Now, you could argue it continues because she needs it not just to kill Caleb, but to confront the first. So I've now convinced myself that these are the same things. She gets the weapon to confront Caleb, to defeat the first, and that is parallel with dealing with the one and only and being alone, because she uses that scythe to change that, to change the entire mythology. In that sense, the climax is doing the spell. It's going in to the school, getting everything set up and prepared, saying goodbye to her friends, and Willow doing the spell. So Willow is the one who prevails at the climax by succeeding and uniting all the slayers, making all the potential slayers, empowering them, I should say. Not so, I mean, they are united because of it, but it's empowering them. But you do have to finish that off with, what do you do when you have that power? Not much is accomplished if they all die in the battle. So they go into this battle. But the climax is slightly different than the climax of the season. The climax of the season really centers on that battle And the climax of this 5-episode arc really centers on that empowerment. But they're pretty intertwined. And the falling action is essentially the same as in Chosen, though you could see the battle as falling action after they all are empowered. But pretty much that all goes together. So is that 5-episode arc, is that one complete story? I'm pretty convinced that it is, but I'm not sure that it was necessarily approached that way from a writing perspective. And certainly, as I pointed out, there are very dramatic moments that probably work better or really are those major turns, particularly that reversal of Buffy getting more or less thrown out of her house. Let me know what you think. Do you think I'm forcing this structure on the 5 episodes? Does it help you see them differently? And how do you feel about them as a whole? I would love to hear. You can comment on Patreon on the Buffy and the Art of Story Facebook page, or you can email me at buffystorypod@gmail.com. That is it for this episode, other than foreshadowing about Angel, the series. There are some spoilers about what characters you will see. I'm not going to spoil any major plot turns for the series or even the episode, but there are those spoilers there, so consider that if you have not yet watched Angel. My plan is, and this is before I sit down to outline City of, the pilot episode, is to do a summary of each episode, a little bit less detailed of a breakdown, so it should be a little bit shorter on the plot summary, and then I will get into more specifics as I look at what works best and least in the plot, what's the point or theme of each episode, who is the most compelling character and why, which could be a hero, a villain, a side character, how the world works. What are we building with this new world? Because, as we'll see, it is a different world than Buffy's. And finally, I'll rate each episode from 1 to 10, with 10 being equivalent to the best Buffy episodes ever, and 1 being below what I see as the least best Buffy episodes, like Beer Bad and Where the Wild Things Are, because I do anticipate that there will be Angel episodes that I don't think are as good as those Buffy least favorite episodes of mine. But we'll see as we go through. Maybe I'll be surprised and everything will at least be as good as those. If you are not sticking around for foreshadowing, thank you so much for listening, and a special thank you to the patrons who support the podcast. I will be taking a break in June. Please come back in early July for Angel, Season 1, Episode 1, City of, where Angel learns about the powers that be, tries to save a woman in distress, and runs into an old friend from Sunnydale. Thank you to everyone who has rated or reviewed the Buffy and the Art of Story podcast, told a friend about it, or shared it on social media. It helps other fans of Buffy find the podcast, and it's especially important these days when there are so many great podcasts out there. It's hard to get attention if people don't already know about the show. And a special thank you to the patrons. I am working on a follow-up episode to one I did earlier this season about the first. In it, I asked, halfway through season 7, is the first portrayed in a consistent way? What are the unanswered questions that I hope will be addressed by the end of the season? Are there limits on the first's power, and what are they? And what is the extent of the first's power? In this follow-up episode, I'll talk about which of those questions have and haven't been answered, as well as my thoughts about the first as the big bad for the season. If you would like to hear that episode or all the Patreon bonus content You can do that at patreon.com/Lisa M. Lilly. You can join for as little as the cost of a cup of coffee a month. You can support at a little bit higher level if you would also like access to my course, How to Plot Your Novel from Idea First Draft, as well as a free ebook edition of Buffy and the Art of Story Season 1. Once again, thank you to everyone for listening, for supporting the podcast, and for letting other people know about it. I really appreciate it, and it's what's kept me going for 5 years now. And we are back for foreshadowing, which does include some spoilers. When I first heard about Angel, this series, I was a bit skeptical. I worried that it would be too campy and goofy. I mean, Angel, the detective, I had heard Cordelia was going to be on the show, and that just seemed odd. But it turned out that those aspects really worked. And I think it's because it is not a revamp of Buffy just with Angel as a hero. It is a very different show with a different vibe that draws on Buffy as backstory and uses some of the Buffy lore, but does quite a bit to adjust it or fill in gaps or add all sorts of dimensions to that world, which is why I plan to include that segment on world building. What is this world about? Angel and Cordelia work for me from the moment they meet at this kind of fancy Hollywood party. And Cordelia looks amazing, and she's in this beautiful dress, and she is there because she's come to LA to become an actress. And she does a great job of seeming like this is going wonderfully. And then we see her in her apartment. It is roach infested. She's really broke. And she's doing these meditations to try to manifest something good in her life. And I like that they build on where Cordelia was at the end of Buffy. Her father had lost all their money because he had been engaged in tax evasion. Cordelia wasn't able to go to college. She says they took everything, her car, I think her clothes, and we really see this. So that is not dropped. And this is why things are so hard for Cordelia. And at the same time, we see that fun and lightness in her character, and we see how she can put on this good front. Angel, too, is really compelling as he struggles to help people when he really cannot live in the world with them. It's not just that he mostly can't be out during the day except in certain circumstances. He just drank Buffy's blood at the end of season 3, and he is tempted. He is struggling with a need for blood, human blood, not animal blood, and with his lack of connection, he has lost Buffy. Of course, in the show Buffy, I tend to think of it from her perspective, how devastating the breakup is for her, and Angel's the one who initiates it, but it is devastating for him as well, and he is dealing with the aftermath of that. So it is not a Angel Solves Crimes show, although that does happen at times, but it's also Angel struggles with his place in the world and with the weight of his guilt over the many terrible things he has done. The tone is very different from Buffy. The tone, the look. I mean, Buffy, yes, we had a lot of graveyard scenes, but we also had a lot of daytime scenes, a lot of sun. Especially in the first 3 seasons, many what Buffy might call normal high school activities. And Buffy was striving for so long for a normal life. Angel, on the other hand, does not have any hope of a normal life. And the tone is not, as in Buffy, a hero protecting humans and ultimately triumphing, though not always, but in the end, prevailing over evil with Angel. It is a very noir tone and a noir story. And though I had that feeling. I did have to look up what goes into noir. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, it's a style of filmmaking characterized by such elements as cynical heroes, stark lighting effects, frequent use of flashbacks, intricate plots, and underlying existentialist philosophy. So we definitely have the cynical hero in the sense that Angel starts out, he is cynical about himself. He does not know if he could ever be redeemed. He does not know if he's worthy of it. And there are many times in the series he struggles with cynicism about human beings. In contrast, Buffy, while certainly acknowledging that human beings can do evil, is all about protecting humans. She draws a very clear line between killing demons versus killing humans. There's a human justice system to deal with humans. That is not her realm. And in some ways, that allows her to be a more unequivocal hero. And she also does, ultimately, there are more gray areas, draw a line between not killing demons who are not posing a danger, not killing Spike when he gets that chip, even though his intentions are still evil. So Buffy is more clearly a hero. Angel, a little more of an anti-hero, and he does struggle with cynicism and with himself. We will see him go through some really dark periods where he becomes dangerous, even though he doesn't become angelus. And then there is always the danger of him becoming angelus, which we saw play out in the crossover episodes this season. Angel, the series, does frequently make use of flashbacks. We will learn much more about Spike and Drew and Angel and Darla. This is an area where they can develop so much because, yes, we got a little of that in Buffy, but there are huge amounts of the history that were just alluded to and some not covered at all. So Angel has a broad canvas to use to fill in all those years. That Angel was a vampire before he met Buffy, long before. There are intricate plots for sure, and this underlying existentialist philosophy as Angel grapples with whether there is any meaning in the world. Even the powers that be, which are introduced in the first episode and set up as a sort of force for good, are not entirely clear or reliable. I find it super interesting that Buffy does not have a force for good that is clear. We have the first evil, so we've got that, but a lot of ambiguity over the force for good. And we don't get any indication that Buffy has some sort of orders from on high. To the contrary, it is a Watchers Council mainly of men, and they are very flawed. And the start of the Slayer's power, as we learned this season, comes from harnessing some of the demon's power and infusing it in a young woman against her will. So we don't have that powers that be operating that we know of. The Guardian suggests there was something else, but as I talked about, really raises more questions than she answers. In Angel, in contrast, we learn about the powers that be, and they will send visions to Doyle, a character we meet in the first episode, to guide Angel. But often there are questions about them. In addition, when it comes to evil, Angel the series does grapple with the idea of a larger evil, but the agents of evil in Angel are quite often humans. They are organized. They are running things in LA. There is a law firm, Wolfram and Hart, that represents demons, vampires, and does plenty of its own evil. And Angel will meet one of them in the pilot, and Wolfram and Hart will be there throughout the series and really represent the human side of evil and show us that demons, vampires are entrenched in Los Angeles in a way that is not the case in Sunnydale. They are woven into the fabric of the world, and many, many people know about them. this contrast to Sunnydale where, yes, we had the mayor who was a demon, but for the most part, there was no sense that vampires or demons were running things or were organized and working together. They were mainly on their own, or maybe like Spike and Drew, they teamed up for a while. They had a group of vampires around them, but they weren't running Sunnydale. And most people could close their eyes and ignore them. Now we find out that the Sunnydale students are somewhat aware of what's going on. It's still considered an aberration. It's still outside the realm of society, where in Angel, the vampires, the demons, and the lawyers are entrenched in society. They are a big part of it. They are very powerful and wealthy. So that is a difference in Angel as well. And that, too, is one of the things I love about the show. It very much is its own show. And thinking about it that way helped me understand how people who watched Angel first see Buffy almost as backstory to Angel or a prequel to Angel. To me, that's appalling because I love Buffy so much, obviously, but you really do not need to have watched Buffy to just dive in with Angel. I will stop there and save other thoughts for when I get to the episodes. I hope you will stick with me for Angel. Thank you again for listening. I will be on break, as I said, in June, but I'll be back in July, probably July 7th, with Angel Season 1, Episode 1, City of, where Angel meets Doyle, his link to the powers that be, strives to save a woman from vampires, and runs into Cordelia. You can find back Buffy and the Art of Story episodes, as well as the Buffy and the Art of Story books and all my fiction and nonfiction at lisalilly.com. For more Buffy and the Art of Story content, early releases of regular podcast episodes, and access to my course, How to Plot Your Novel from Idea to First Draft, join the Patreon community at patreon.com/Lisa M. Lilly. That's patreon.com/LISA, M as in Marie, LILLY. Music for this episode was written and performed by Robert Newcastle. Buffy and the Art of Story is a production of Spiny Woman, LLC, copyright 2025. All rights reserved.